Hello and welcome to UELtras on Ranks FC, the new show that talks you through Europe's most exciting club competition, the Europa League, and its new baby brother, the Europa Conference League. I'm Jack Collins, and as we head into the business end of both competitions, I'm here to give you the lowdown on the biggest storylines and things to watch on a Thursday night. So let's get stuck in ahead of the first leg of the playoffs. A little bit of a scene setter for those of you who are new to these competitions or haven't quite seen the restructuring of what's going on. In the Champions League, the top two in each group go through into the round of 16. It's pretty simple. It's a little bit different in the Europa League this year. We've got a new format, and obviously the Conference League is a new league, so there's a new format for that as well. What's happened is, instead of going straight through into a round of 32, the teams who dropped down from the Champions League, who finished third in those group stages, they go into a playoff against the teams who finished second in the Europa League group stages. Those 16 teams play off for the right to play the Europa League group winners in the actual round of 16. Similar for the Europa Conference League. Group winners straight through into the Europa Conference League round of 16. And then the teams who finished third in the group stages in the Europa League play the teams who finished second in the group stages of the Europa Conference League in order to book their spot in the round. So there's 24 teams at the moment left in both competitions. We're going to pick three of the biggest ties in each competition, have a little look through them and see what there is to offer this Thursday. Let's start with the Europa League. And I've got a bit of a thing here that I think 12 of the 24 teams left can win this tournament. Sevilla, Napoli, Barcelona, Dortmund, Leverkusen, West Ham, Atalanta, RB Leipzig, Real Sociedad, Real Betis, Porto, and Lazio. Now, the interesting thing is that 6 of those teams face off against each other here, which is pretty nuts. And I think this new format, for whatever it's worth, has made the Europa League more competitive than it has ever been. This is the tastiest draw I think we've ever seen at Europa League level. It's arguably more exciting than the Champions League draw. I think that what we're seeing here is a really, really intriguing playoff round. And that's before 8 of the teams left in this tournament even go on to play in the round of 16. I'm going to start us off with Barcelona versus Napoli. It's the early kickoff, the Diego Maradona derby, the headline tie of the round, and impossible to ignore. A tie steeped in history and European glory and narrative. As I said, Maradona's tie here. But it's also two teams in quite interesting places. And contrasted to what you'd normally expect, is Napoli well-versed in a title race in Italy, started beautifully this season and have stayed on quite nicely as well, despite some injuries, despite a lot of players going off to AFCON. And Napoli still feel very in this hunt. Barcelona are in a battle for that top 4 spot in Spain, but they are improving under Xavi. Barcelona's best and perhaps only chance of silverware this season is the Europa League. And in any incarnation in the UEFA Cup, in the Europa League, they've never won this tournament, which makes it something that could be very interesting. They tweeted the other day about having a spot in the trophy cabinet reserved for this tournament. I think it's quite interesting. This season, they've settled mostly back into a 4-3-3 under Xavi. Gavi playing as an inside forward of late on that kind of left wing, and Adama Traore playing in a traditional winger role. The midfield three of Busquets, Frankie de Jong, and Pedri is the best in this competition. There are people out there who will tell you that it might well be the best in the world. Now, I'm not quite sure if it was the best in the world, Barcelona would have gone out in the Champions League group stages, but I think that they're onto something at the very least. This is an incredibly talented midfield and definitely up there in that conversation. However, they are still struggling defensively. They conceded twice to Espanyol in the derby at the weekend and twice to Atleti in a game they won 4-2 in the weekend before that. Ronald Araujo's absence will be keenly felt. He's been Barcelona's best defender by a country mile, frankly, this season. And ultimately, without him, they feel like a much weaker unit. That said, on the positives, Ferran seems to be fitting in nicely in that number 9 role. It does look like that's going to be his preferred position moving forward, but it also is still going to take time to get these patterns working how they'd like. Aubameyang came off the bench at the weekend to make his first Barcelona appearance. Questions asking this could be his first start. Now, we've seen Gavi in that role on the left-hand side, which has been interesting. And look, we love Gavi, and Gavi is an unbelievable player. But it might just be interesting to see if that little bit more directness, playing as that inside forward with more of a goal threat to him, Adama kind of playing as the more traditional winger. It does feel like there's something to be had here for Barcelona if they can make that front three tick. Flip it over, you go to Napoli, who have been quietly rolling along back to their best, haven't lost a league game since December the 4th. They've beaten Milan and held Juventus, albeit a weakened Juventus, and Inter Milan at the weekend since then. So it's not been all plain sailing, not all easy games. They perhaps should have beaten Inter at the weekend. The return of Victor Osimhen means that Osimhen, Fabian Ruiz, Kalidou Koulibaly is a rock solid spine. We're seeing Andre Frank Zambo Anguissa, who's been a revelation in that midfield, back in the mix, came on as a substitute at the weekend against Inter. They're still missing Chucky Lozano with an injury, still looks set to miss this one, but options wide in Politano and Elmas on that side who can cover for the fact that Insigne is going to start down that other side. They're returning slowly to full strength. And I think in a kind of weird way, they're probably favourites for this tie for me. So where's it won and lost? I imagine the massive duel here is Insigne versus either Sergiño Dest or Dani Alves on that right-hand side. That's going to be a massive battle. If you give Insigne the chances, he's going to create, he's going to find opportunities to pull the trigger. Now, he hasn't scored from open play this season in Serie A. He has only scored from the spot, but I think it's a matter of time. If you give him those opportunities, and Barcelona have given up those opportunities at the back, I'd imagine Dani Alves starts to give them a little bit more of that nous, a little bit more of that defensive solidity in the mix. But that could be a really interesting battle down that side. You flip it over, and in front of them, can you get Adama running at Mario Rui in space? Now, Mario Rui is a wonderful player, but probably Portugal's fourth choice left back at this point in the conversation, and someone who I think can be got at, loves picking up a yellow card, loves a cynical foul. If you can get Adama running at him early doors, if you're Barcelona, try and get him onto that booking early, then I think you're going to find joy down that side. And Adama has got 2 assists in 2 Barcelona games, which is more than he's managed for Wolves in about the last season and a half before he made this transfer. So something interesting there in just the kind of changed role that he's playing. I think that's maybe where Barcelona can look to find joy. And then you've got this duel of 2 incredible midfields. As we say, the kind of likes of Fabian Ruiz, Andre Zambo Anguissa against Pedri, against Frankie de Jong, against Sergio Busquets. That's a really, really intriguing battle. And I think when you look at it and try and find out if it's going to be Zielinski dropping back in to kind of sit on Busquets and try and make sure that kind of Barcelona passing game doesn't get going as it perhaps might do, that's potentially a really, really interesting battle as well. Okay, let's go to the Sergio Conceição derby. Porto versus Lazio. Porto, the last unbeaten side in Europe's top 10 leagues, and have proved a really stubborn test for quite a lot of teams. This side under Sergio Conceição is weaker than it was before January, but still very well put together. This can be an emotional game for Conceição. He spent pretty much his entire career playing for either Lazio or Porto. He's obviously the manager there now. The Porto side have come out and said, it's a very emotional game. It's one we want to win for the manager, which is nice, but they were involved in an emotional game at the weekend against Sporting in El Clasico. I was lucky enough to be there on that Friday night, and it was one that really boiled over. There are some heads that can get loose in this Porto team, and what you don't want is that spilling over into this game. What they've done most of this season is played in a 4-4-2. They've seen a little bit of a 4-1-4-1 at times, but they are weaker than they were before January because they lost Luis Diaz to Liverpool. They brought in to replace him Wenderson Galeno, who many people might not know. He used to play for Braga. He actually came over to play for Porto and then was shipped off to Braga without really getting any minutes. He's now been brought back. He loves this competition. He absolutely loves it. In 24 Europa League games, he scored 11 games and notched up 12 assists, including 6 goals in this year's group stage. Might well be expected to pick up the slack with that lack of Luis Diaz. So one to watch there. Evan Nielsen up front was pretty much 4th choice striker last year. He's really come into his own leading the line this season. He's been up there in the scoring charts. He's been eviscerating defenders in so many ways. And then there's the youth products coming through. Keep an eye on both Fabio Vieira and Vitinha, 2 of Portugal's most exciting talents. And of course, the coach's son, Chico Conceição, the golden boy of Narrative FC. Flip it over to Lazio, though, and they're on the charge themselves. They've really started to tick in 2022, and they've now scored 3 times in 4 of their 5 league games since the turn of the year. They've got back-to-back 3-0 wins over Fiorentina and Bologna in Serie A. Although sandwiched in the middle of that was a really horrible cup exit to Milan. They got battered 4-0. So that means that this is their last chance for silverware across the course of this year. And Maurizio Sarri's 4-3-3 really seems to have finally got himself embedded in this team, and the creative juices are starting to float, especially in this midfield where Luis Alberto and Sergej Milinkovic-Savic are these kind of dynamic twin eights in front of Lucas Leiva at the base, who's playing what you might call the Jorginho role for Sarri. An interesting one is Matthias Akanji, who was signed last summer from Hellas Verona as a kind of backup winger option. He's really stepped up in the absence of Felipe Anderson, finally found some form with the kind of minutes starting to get really under his belt. 2 goals, 2 assists in his last 2 league games. And of course, up top, there's Ciro Immobile, once again leading the Capocannoniere charts in Serie A. Leads line wearing the armband, and just a man who doesn't seem to age when he's playing in that Lazio light blue. So where's it won and lost? I mean, as we said in the Porto section, a little bit on just keeping your head. These are 2 very passionate sides, 2 teams and 2 fan bases who will get right behind their sides and will try and, win that mental battle. We saw Porto lose their heads. We've seen Lazio do it before. So I think it's quite an interesting one in there. There's also this kind of midfield thing where Porto might have to look to stiffen, because if they play Mateus Uribe as a lone pivot, he's going to get run over. They did that in the game against Sporting, and it did feel a little bit like they were easy to cut through. I think if you've got Luis Alberto and Sergej Milinkovic-Savic, the creative juices that they have going, the creative talent they have in so much abandon, it could get a little bit ugly for Porto. So you might see Marco Grujic come in here a little bit to play alongside him, or new signing Steven Eustáquio, who signed from Pathos de Ferreira to replace Sergio Oliveira. Perhaps they trust in Vitinha's instincts in there. Vitinha is such a good player, but I would be a little bit worried that they might explode into action if they're given that space by this Porto side. There's also this Lazzari versus Fabio Vieira, or Wenson Galeno if he plays. Fabio Vieira plays as a kind of floating 10, often off a striker. And what he does there is he just drifts out to this left-hand side. It's where he created Porto's equaliser from against Sporting on Friday night. And watching the Zari fly up and down that flank, you do worry if there's going to be space to exploit there. So that might be one to keep an eye on as well. Okay, finally for the Europa League, RB Leipzig against Real Sociedad in the late kickoff, the Alexander Sørloth derby, if you will. A tale of 2 seasons in some ways. Real Sociedad started like a train, but have lost their way somewhat of late. In the kind of other hand, Leipzig started terribly and have come roaring back into form, which leaves us with a tie that's kind of hanging nicely in the balance. La Real currently 6th in La Liga and might well be looking over their shoulders in terms of confirming European football next season. Basque derby at the weekend, which is absolutely massive, not only in terms of local pride and bragging rights, but in terms of league position, because Athletic Club are just 2 places below Real Sociedad now in the table. In the 5 league games that La Real have played in 2022, they've won 2, drawn 3. Yes, they're unbeaten, but they are dropping points against much weaker sides. They got battered by Real Betis in the Copa del Rey quarterfinals, and it does feel like they've lost their momentum. It's usually a 4-2-3-1 with Adnan Januzaj, David Silva, and Mikel Oyarzabal behind Alexander Isak or the aforementioned Sørloth. Occasionally more of a 4-3-3. We saw Rafinha brought in the January window in order to strengthen that middle part. Look, on paper, they're still a very, very good side, and they're more than capable of beating anybody on their day, but they don't feel as cohesive as they perhaps did earlier on in this season. Leipzig, on the other hand, are starting to purr. They've lost only once in 2022, which was a really weird tight encounter with Bayern. They lost 3-2 when they gifted a win to their opponents with some really sloppy defending, but they cut Bayern apart at times as well, and there's something to be said for that. Tedesco has rejuvenated this side after a tricky period under Jesse Marsch, where it just didn't really work for either party. They reverted to a 3-4-2-1 mostly, and they'll still be grateful to Marsch for what he unlocked in Christopher Nkunku. And ultimately, you look at this, flat across the board, and the Frenchman is quite simply one of the form players across the course of Europe this season. He's got 19 goals and 13 assists in 31 games in all competitions, averaging a goal contribution every 80 minutes or so, which is ridiculous form. He's always a creative threat. He's become a complete attacking player across this season. I think we've seen this kind of blossoming into a real talent. He's on the wish lists of almost every big club in Europe now because of what he's putting out on the biggest stages. He put out an amazing campaign in the Champions League, even as Leipzig struggled. They've got an incredibly deep squad, and one I think that will now fancy their chances of going all the way this season. So where's it won or lost? Real have been dreadful on their travels, to be honest. They've never won a game in Germany. Can they stop Nkunku? Can anybody stop Nkunku? I'm really not sure at this point. I'm concerned by that Leipzig overload down both flanks, and that Real could really get overwhelmed in the first leg here before they even get it back to Anoeta. That said, there should be space for David Silva between the lines and for Oyarzabal to attack Klosterman directly one-on-one, which is what he's incredibly good at. Isak off the shoulder should be a good battle with Josep Guardiola, who's really come into his own as an incredibly good defender in the middle of this back three this season. So that's a battle that I'm really looking forward to as well. Okay, let's come on to the Europa Conference League. A little bit less depth here, but I just want to point out a couple of ties. In the early, PSV Eindhoven versus Maccabi Tel-Aviv in the Eran Zahavi derby. Eran Zahavi faces up against a team very close to his heart because he scored 98 goals in 119 games for Maccabi and wore the captain's armband. Loved by former manager Slavisa Jokanovic and former general manager Jordi Cruyff. Tough men to impress. He's now 34 years old and shows no signs of slowing down as he leads this PSV attack. He's, in a team boasting both Carlos Vinicius, who we saw on loan at Tottenham last year, and at Benfica, someone who was, very highly rated, and young Belgian star Jorge Vertessen. He is still very much the main man up top for PSV. Worth keeping an eye on too, on the veteran presence of Mario Götze, who's revitalized in this 10 role in Eindhoven. And of course, mercurial wingers Cody Gakpo and Noni Madueke, both who look on one-way tracks to the very top of the game. On the other side, former Watford man Stipe Perica leads the line and the scoring charts for Maccabi. But the player I've really liked watching is Dan Beaton, plays at the top of Maccabi's sort of 4-4-2 diamond. His assists and vision help get their Europa Conference League campaign off the ground, and he's a really, really lovely watch. On to the second game, which is Celtic versus Bodø Glimt in the Stefan Johansson derby. Stefan Johansson, now QPR captain, formerly of Fulham and Celtic, started his career in the Bodø Glimt ranks, so one to just keep an eye on in terms of narrative there. But a really interesting tie at Celtic Park, and quite a lot of that is to do with the fact that there's this real feel of the unknown about the visitors. Now, I don't mean that in terms of Bodø Glimt come from Norway and they're unknown. I mean the fact that after they were crowned Norwegian champions for the second year of running, which is no mean feat, by the way, for a club of this size and stature, they haven't played a competitive game since the last group game on December the 9th. They'll also kind of feel that they shouldn't be in this playoff round. They battered Roma at home and they drew with them away and then threw away top spot on the very last day by drawing with Zorya Luhansk. It felt kind of cruel at the same time, but ultimately it was in their own hands and they just weren't able to grasp it. And now what they've got is a really tricky tie with Celtic. They've lost a couple of key men. Their centre midfield anchor Patrick Berg left for Lens. Centre forward and their kind of main goal threat, Eric Botheim, he had a goal every 2 games in all comps last season. He left for Krasnodar. So kind of where they replace them is absolutely crucial. Celtic, on the other hand, I feel like they're really hitting their groove, especially at home at Parkhead. Rio Hatate and Matt O'Reilly have been revelations, really, since joining in January. And Postecoglou's methods are really starting to sink in to this Celtic team. And a comprehensive drubbing of sworn rivals Rangers last month sent Celtic back to the top of the Scottish Premier League. It was a swarm, a press, and an intensity I don't think we've seen at Celtic Park for some years. And if they can repeat that, they're going to be tough for anybody at all to handle, frankly. No Kyogo, we don't think. And a few months ago, that could have been devastating. But Giacomakis has stepped up a little bit in his absence. And there's also Dyson Maida, who runs around like an absolute lunatic, frankly. His pressing game is off the scale good. And that addition lessens the burden on everyone else as well. Celtic won't fancy that trip to Norway in February, though, especially seeing what Bodø did to Roma in the conditions in sort of November time. So I think it's going to be interesting how Celtic start. And that's, I think, what's going to be the key difference between winning and losing in this tie as a whole over 2 legs. We'll finish with Sparta Prague versus Partizan Belgrade in the Dejan Joksimovic derby. I'm reliably informed. This is another late game, and Partizan are sitting pretty at the top of the Serbian Superliga, and like Porto, are unbeaten domestically this year. They've dropped only 4 points in 22 games, which is pretty impressive going, frankly. They did, though, make hard work of getting out of a group that few would have expected them to struggle with. They lost to Flora in Tallinn, and only other results going their way on the final day secured them a playoff berth. because they were held at home by Anorthosis of Famagusta, who finished, I think, 4th in the Cypriot League last year. It's not a great look for Partizan, but does feel like they're finding a groove. And the big man for them is Cape Verdean striker Ricardo Gomes, 23 goals this season, absolutely flying. And I think one to look out for is that his main supply source at times has been Milos Jojic from the base of midfield, plays in that kind of deeper role and able to really pick out those kind of quarterback passes from that spot. They now face Sparta Prague, who are 3rd in the Czech First League behind local rival Slavia, and Victoria Plzeň, who are regulars, if you know, on the Europa stage. Still, Sparta gave a really reasonable account of themselves in the Europa League groups. They beat Rangers at home, and they very nearly got something against Lyon at home too. They lost that game at 4-3. They've got 1 point from 3 games on the road, though, and that's why they found themselves dropped into the Conference League. And a very tasty matchup here. One to keep an eye on, David Hanko, a friend of Ranks FC from a long time ago. He scored twice from left back in the Europa League group stages. And then, of course, Adam Hlozec, who is touted as one of the hottest prospects in Czechia. I think there's a lot of big clubs who have Hlozec on their radar. I know West Ham have been linked numerous times, but of course, across the course of the Euros as well, he's someone that was attracting a lot of attention. So if you're looking out for a couple of Conference League ties to keep an eye on, those would be my 3 bets. Right, thank you so much for watching this first episode of UELtras, the show that looks at the Europa League and the Europa Conference League. Please make sure you hit subscribe on the Ranks FC channel and like this. Give it a share with your mates if you think they are Europa League ultras in waiting. Can't wait to see what happens this Thursday. And we'll be back next week to look at what went down and also to look at the all-important second legs. Thanks for watching.